Hello everyone and welcome back. Continuing with our MMO roundtable meeting. This is the second part of environments. In the first part we talked about space. Now it's time for us to move over to a planet-side discussion.
Alright, so don't everybody talk at once. So on the planet, I guess we can break this down, what I was saying earlier, into three primary areas. We've got land, we've got sea, and then there's the kind of questionable one about air.
I just put air down, so if we ever wanted to do
let's just start with land. Now, how do we want to pursue this discussion from here? I mean,
here's how I'd like to pursue it. Before we discuss land, sea, or air, I would like to go ahead and put weather environments down first.
Okay.
And let's spend just a minute talking lightly about weather. Weather fascinates me. Mm-hmm. As we talked about in the real estate videos, with weather, we can have it adversely affect the player. Mm-hmm. And we could take it even further than that into affecting other things as well. I just need to get some ideas from you guys.
Well, you're thinking of weather almost like an NPC in of itself.
In of itself, yeah. I like the idea of...
I think the big thing I've pulled from what we've discussed of weather so far is that it's more than just a visual effect.
Correct, more than just visual. Nelson is such a huge fan of planning out, like if you're going to go on a big exploration, let's plan this out. What's the best routes? What's the best, everything. I love mixing that with weather because now we need to check the forecast so that we make sure the routes we want to take are the best routes. Just as a loose example, as a pilot, if I want to fly somewhere, obviously I'm going to look for the best routes, and weather is going to be a heavy factor in determining the route that I'm going to take, or even if I am going to travel from point A to point B. Go ahead, Nelson.
And even then, I mean, maybe it might be interesting to put some uncertainty in those weather forecasts. I mean, I know it is the future, but it'd be cool to, because like the weather is like the de facto Earth environment thing that's the Earth dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, deadly. That's cool.
It's interesting that I've never really seen weather being incorporated into the gameplay mechanics of games besides limiting visibility. I mean...
And the gameplay mechanics of life, it's interesting, though, because if you're out hiking and you get caught, you're in the mountains and you get caught in a horrible blizzard, snowstorm, if you're not prepared, you can die.
Yeah, or you got to eat your friends.
Well, but see, that begs another question, which I know ties more into character use than anything, but would you want to play in the element of exposure? Because that has its own little can of worms. It's like, if you're in a really cold area, does your character need some sort of gear, element, equipment, whatever, to withstand the cold?
Well, Metro 2033 did an interesting little dynamic with that.
Relax, Zach. Go ahead, Lee.
They did.
Well, I know the game sucked.
I just didn't like it. It was actually an okay game. I just hated it. Anyway, go ahead.
But it had the interesting mechanic that because it was happening in, I think, like Siberia or was it Moscow in the winter or something like that, where when you went outdoors, it was so cold you could only stay for a little bit before you started freezing to death. And they tied that in with your display where your monitor started frosting over. Yeah. And you would eventually freeze to death if you didn't get inside.
I personally like the idea. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, I don't like the idea of we've got to feed our character and.
Yeah, because I was going to say, if you're giving the concept of exposure, are you also opening them to real world fatigue?
I would not want to deal with having to feed them 3 times a day. And all of that stuff.
Well, because something that occurred to me like last night, right? I was jogging. And I was thinking about the MMO because I was bored and I was jogging, and it suddenly occurred to me that when you play like World of Warcraft, your character is like always running.
Yeah, always.
You make your character run like 10 miles a day, and they're always at a dead run. How often do you hit the button? Well, actually, I'm sure there's a lot of players who don't even know it's there.
To walk.
You hit the button to make your character walk.
Right.
You never do. You're always at a dead run, and it's like that's a question of how far you want to push things. Now, that's a branch way off topic.
Yeah, the exposure one I like.
Okay.
Oh, and the reason I like it, my argument for liking it is...
Well, it makes weather deadly.
It makes weather more interesting.
Yeah.
So it makes a person needing to be aware of the environment they're wanting to explore in more interesting. It makes them need to pay attention, which I like that. Not to mention, some of the minerals and some things could be placed in places that are very, very rough on the body, that are very harsh as far as the environment's concerned. So you need to think about stuff like that.
And
go ahead.
I hate the whole internet thing because of like the 50 millisecond lag.
We fight with it.
Okay, well, like you could have this idea just popped in my head just randomly. But if certain areas were more susceptible to certain types of weather, and those areas did, like you just said, had things of interest, you would then develop these sort of satellite communities that contain these buildings that were really, weatherproof, but they weren't very large cities, and those cities had to have items or things trafficked to them.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's one of the. I made sure to jot down the idea of zone relevancy when it comes to weather, because that way you can determine, this area. Okay, well, it's in the desert; it's prone to sandstorms, but not necessarily.
Let's write down some of the kinds of storms we could have.
Oh, sure.
Because I love electrical storms.
Yeah, because in the end, that's all we care about in terms of weather is just storms.
It's lightning.
It's just storms.
One of the hardest effects to pull off accurately.
Radiation storms, electrical interference.
I mean, this is your own
Arcanosite storms.
Yeah, arcanosite storms. Interesting.
Really, whatever you want.
You start shooting fireballs out your butt.
Oh, jeez.
Well, I'm just saying, you got to be careful in those storms because now...
Yeah, the Taylors of the world really love when those storms show up. I've only ever seen one game that pulled off tornadoes.
Blizzards.
Fairly good.
Well, I mean, if you made it as just like a great big NPC with a storm surrounding it, you know, that's pretty much it.
Go ahead and throw blizzards in. Leonard, you're awfully quiet. What kind of storms? Give me something creative.
Frogs.
Raining cats and dogs. Yes.
Burning frogs falling from the sky.
Brimstone.
There you go.
Hail.
Well, you could have hailstorms, of course. Those hurt.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's painful rain is what that amounts to.
See, in buying property, again, when we're reviewing different properties to buy, you could look at what the average, predictable, or what the average weather or weather history has been, for that area.
You can still do solar and radiation. Though technically I think they're both the same.
We'll just
Both
say solar.
types.
Now, there's some that, okay, they are more of a visual effect, but you should still think about them.
Fog, yeah.
That's true.
Right. What are some of the attributes that these storms would have against your character? Obviously most of them would limit visibility. Some of them might hinder certain types of equipment.
No, let's put a section to discuss this. I like this.
Or even limiting how fast you can travel. Although at the same time that, I don't know. Is that something that
you may want to travel around a storm if it did that? Because you might be able to get from point A to point B faster if you went around a storm.
Wouldn't want to fly through a sandstorm, that's for sure.
No. Yeah, visibility's definitely good.
Just also, some you're going to take damage on, of course.
Exactly.
I don't know how much of a world simulator you're planning on making Lee write, Jason, but certain mobs could disperse during certain types of storms. Maybe certain types of storms that you aren't particularly susceptible to. That would make you able to go through certain areas quicker or easier.
Or in certain types of storms, like electrical storms, these particular things come out of the ground, and that's the only time you ever see them, and they are a complete pain in the ass to kill. So you may not want to go to an area to collect something if you know electrical storm is passing through.
One of the coolest, well, not the coolest, but just one of the most notable things about where I grew up in Northern California, it would come out right before it would rain.
What's that?
Invariably. Every time. You'd know it was going to rain because the tarantulas would come out.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
You'd see them on the road. Like, they'd be sitting on the road, or they'd get run over by cars and shit. Just great big old tarantulas. And invariably, when you start seeing a bunch of tarantulas out, it's going to rain in a day or so.
But Nelson, I absolutely love that idea of it affecting mobs and all. I want mobs to be affected anyways because we're going to have a discussion on time and the difference between day and night. So that already needs, we're already going to be taking a look at that. But it would definitely be cool. Like you said, you could have things dispersed, but I also like the idea of encountering more deadly things that you would not normally encounter that come out during these storms that make it much more dangerous to be in that area.
Yeah, or vice versa.
Or vice versa, yeah.
Like the big dragon on the hill gets chased away because you got a hailstorm.
That's right. Exactly. So now the cool thing is now you're making more players pay attention to the weather just so they can finish quests. So now you're making your quests a little bit more rich.
Sure.
So yeah, I love that idea. That's great.
Well, also, I mean, it has so many connotations to the real world, too. It's like if you're going to lay siege to somebody's building, like even now in the real world, if you're going to attack a fortification, generally rain is on your side. Rain and inclement weather always favors the attacker, unless it's, you're having to fight uphill or something, just because it hurts visibility and all those other things. Especially when you need the element of surprise.
Yeah, the damaged equipment, that's a good one. Obviously, we've talked about that. And, of course, we'll have a video dedicated at some point later to just weather, where we'll get into very specifics. Right now, this is just getting our initial ideas truly down on something in stone, if you will.
Or pixels.
Or pixels, yes, very good. So, yeah, damage to equipment or damage/interference.
Well, I've got impair attribute, and I have equipment functionality.
Oh, okay, there you go. Yeah, very nice. All right, any other thoughts with these? Because these are all things that, once again, if we come up with some sort of nice model that we can implement for weather generation, we never know what the world's going to be like.
This is probably pushing stuff way too far. Lee's going to throw something at me. What if...
No, I'm not going to have to throw anything. I'm going to be there in a couple of days. I'll just hit you with something.
Yeah,
I'm going to throw something.
Yeah, you can erase that one off. We won't worry about that.
All right. But, it was at least worth thinking about for a minute.
Yeah. No, actually,
nice big mudslide.
Changing the terrain isn't too hard at all because all of the stuff that we've been talking about is all handled on the server side, not the client side. Yeah. So if we do decide to deform the terrain on the server side, all that does is get propagated to the clients and their local caches get updated.
Yeah, it just gets a little more interesting when the players are actually having some sort of duel in an area that's about to have a landslide.
Or, maybe water levels raise if you got a lot of rainfall. I don't know. I was just thinking.
Not really. They just die and they get a report you died in a landslide. Sorry.
Oh, God.
Nice. That's one way to handle it.
So anything else while we're on, before we start getting into the actual elements of planet side,
generally speaking, this is all I can think of right now.
Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and visit now the moving on. Now that we know that this is something that we want to keep in mind.
I'm going to kind of break this off just so that I know it's its own kind of area because it kind of went out horizontally.
Sure.
All right, so now let's come up here. What's the next thing we want to talk about after weather?
Well, this is where it's going to get interesting because now you're wanting to talk about, the sea, land, the land, the sea, the air, but we're really getting on a point where we're going to be falling over into a discussion of travel. Maybe I'm wrong. If you guys
not quite yet.
Well, what do you got in mind? Help me out, because then that's what I keep thinking.
Well, as far as the land type, as where environment is concerned, is the idea of trying to mimic the different types of biomes that you would find depending on longitude or on latitude.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so depending on your latitude and your prevailing weather conditions would dictate how much moisture, temperature is in the air, which is going to determine what type of biomes are you going to find. Are you going to find tropical forests? Are you going to find temperate forests?
Mm-hmm.
Are there going to be tundra? Is it going to be desert? Is it going to be savanna? Is it going to be, like Zach said, jungle? Is it going to be Arctic conditions?
Okay.
So then each one of these would have its own associated type of flora and fauna.
Mm-hmm.
so we can get a much more robust type of environment all generated for us. It's also going to dictate what type of equipment whoever's going to be traveling in these areas, because you're going to have different types of weather conditions. And if you're in an Arctic environment, you've got to be geared up for it, or you're going to freeze to death. Mm-hmm. And likewise, if you're in the jungle or desert, you need to be prepared for maybe sandstorms. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you'll get ripped to shreds. Who knows? But just the idea of setting up these different types of biomes based on the location in the world. And I'm losing my train of thought.
I see that.
Mountains.
Nelson.
Oh, never mind.
Leonard, you've been quiet for a while. Thoughts?
Now, just going through what Zach's already got, that's pretty complete. His, I can't think of anything else.
I'm trying to keep them really, really generic. We missed like the most popular one that I would think. Desert.
What, desert? Yeah, we said that.
Did we?
Well, there's another,
but I have it written down, so it doesn't count.
There's another one, I think. What is it? It's Tiagra or something like that?
Yeah, see, if it's got a name that you can't even think of, it's not important enough for it to include.
Well, yeah, when it gets like 2 o'clock in the morning, my brain starts to shut down.
But mountains, I really was, when Lee was doing his whole height generation stuff, I really thought the mountains idea was really cool. Getting up to
yeah, just like me. But that comes back to, again, Nelson, the same thing that I love, exploration, and something about huge mountains are awesome because I just want to explore them.
Yeah, and like getting up to the point where you can't see the ground. Mm-hmm. And actually
which
living
we did.
Up there.
Yeah, exactly. If you want to get up space up there and put a pad in for your ship to take off and leave from.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So if you're putting caves in there, you're going to do things like volcanoes too?
Well, I'd lump those under caves. I mean, in terms of exploration. But you could. I see what you're saying.
Do you have something against islands, Zach? I find that offensive.
Why? When an island can have jungle environments.
Can be any of those. Yeah.
Geographic feature.
Yeah.
Well, they're kind of like mountains, but at ground level.
Cool, yeah, exactly. So it's just a combination of mountain, desert, and jungle, and you have the world's perfect island right there.
Yeah. Okay, so environments. All right, we have this, this was kind of something I was saying was a given.
I was too, but it was just like, what can we talk about in terms of this? And
sure.
This is just something that came about.
And then, and so now...
So when I say there's no swamps on Alethea.
So, underwater.
Yeah.
So that popped up for the first time earlier today.
Yeah,
and Lee almost exploded when we said that. It was great. Totally made my day.
What? I got to make a sub simulator too? It's like, well, hold on. Luckily, we ruled out the space simulator, so now I'm only down to a flight sim and a sub sim.
But if you can do the flight sim, you can do the underwater stuff too.
Yeah.
You know, subs are superior to boats in every way imaginable.
That's right.
Yeah, they don't really sink. Oh yeah, no, oh my God, they do sink. So the problem is if they don't surface.
So what are we looking to have underwater? I mean, I know the quick response
mountains,
is cities, but I mean, what are you guys thinking? What mountains. And why?
Well, really, the only reason I brought it up as an environment consideration was, well, because you're going to have to develop for it. Even on underwater in a lake, there's a very particular kind of flora and fauna to be found there, as well as how you navigate it. Are you swimming? Are you, walking slowly on the surface because your character's so laden down with the amount of weapons they're carrying? Nelson? Or, do you have a vehicle specifically for the purpose? These are just some of the considerations. I mean, it is really just its own biome, and you could leave it like that. And I don't want it to turn into a big, long discussion of travel. But do we want underwater to be an important factor in the game? Because I mean, you could argue. I'm sorry, let me get this one last thing. You could argue that, like, at least up until fairly recently, with the advent of Cataclysm, it wasn't even a really big important thing in World of Warcraft because they would limit how long you could stay down there, generally speaking. Anyway, go ahead, Leonard.
Yeah, well, one thing too, since you mentioned Warcraft, it's very barren down there. There's not much to do.
Right.
But it'd be cool if you had an underwater environment where there were lots of things that you could interact with, or, like go spear fishing.
With Cataclysm,
fish.
There's an entire zone in Cataclysm that's just dedicated to under the sea.
Yeah, I think we spent 2 whole nights doing nothing but underwater stuff.
What are you talking about? I've got hundreds of hours invested under there. I made my fortune from living down there.
Beautiful, actually.
Oh, it is. I have that whole area memorized like the back of my hand now.
But yeah, really, just the question is, do we want to focus on that kind of importance, now or later, or at all?
Well, we could even work into a story at some point, and with some asset creation, we can talk about in one of the oceans somewhere that the Alethians are constructing some underwater, just something new, and leave it like that.
Oh, heck, man. Have an ancient great house that had mastered water and then disappeared.
Yeah.
And you go ahead and kind of reflect the history of Atlantis. You just kind of, it's like almost a social tie-in, that there was something very much like that in Alethian history as well, except they're still there. Like the Disney movie.
Dun, dun, dun. Okay, and I guess we could spend just a minute and talk about air as a possibility of as Zach said earlier, like the large floating rocks in on Pandora in the movie
floating
Avatar.
stuff. Floating cities, floating rocks. Which, again, I mean, yeah, I understand before anybody emails me and says, actually, that'd be the same as ground terrain, because your character's not floating. But, I mean, it is another environment with its own design concerns.
Yes.
More castle in the sky there.
Yeah.
Howl's
Floating castle. Giant airships.
I don't have a problem with it just being air. So is there anything that we want to add right here? I mean, because right now I just see it as, we could definitely have stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think
need to have considerations for travel, but which is our next video.
Right, we like it, so let's go with it. And I think the same thing is true here with underwater. The major concern here would just be traveling through it. Because as long as you decide you want to have it.
How awesome would it be to adventure to another planet, but you have to bring a sub in your docking bay. Because the other planet is
a water planet.
Is all water, is all liquid. Yeah. So the whole thing is underwater. Awesome.
But what would you do in air?
What if there was something very rare that you could collect from there that could be something that could make you a tremendous fortune back on Alethea?
Watch The Empire Strikes Back. They had gas mining. It was great.
So even if you didn't want people necessarily going out there, you just put one type of mineral out there that if you brought back... And the things that live in that ocean, ooh, your poor sub. You better be good at getting in and getting out.
For 10 points, what kind of gas were they mining on Cloud City? I'm not going to answer that on the video, just to see if anybody who's watching knows, because I know, I'm just not going to say. Anyway, go ahead.
But suddenly, Nelson, if that is something that could be in super high demand for some reason back on the planet, but nobody's dumb enough to go to it, people are going to go there. I mean...
Right. But why would you establish like a city in air, for example?
Oh, I wouldn't on another
so
planet.
So that Lando Calrissian can be the mayor?
I wouldn't on another planet. On our planet, it's just another interesting place that we could put something.
Well, okay, I mean, I think it depends on how much of your own imagination you're willing to apply to it. So let's say you've got vents in the earth where you've got some gas coming out, like over a volcano or something. So you could literally have a very large collection plant, which is, through some means, hovering directly over that vent at altitude because it's too damn hot to collect at the surface. So that's why you've got that set up there. And it's so big that it actually makes sense to have living quarters there. But over the years, it kind of became popular, and now it's actually got its own little town. It's almost like an arcology that floats in the sky and gathers this gas. That's awesome. And I just came up with that off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's a great movable base for, say, another person in a guild, say, is in another part of the world from you, and you want to move your base over there to have your war.
There you go. All your floating base belong to us.
That's right.
Go ahead, Nelson.
No, I wasn't going to say anything.
Oh, okay. All right, so is that really all that we need to discuss here with environments for now? I think we've made a good decision that we can just go ahead and stick with for space, with it being passive and how we can handle it for starting out.
Yeah.
And I love the discussion on weather, and that's something that I want us later in time to have a more detailed meeting about. But we're going to need to once we start getting into professions and objects and things that will exist in this world, because that's when we're going to have to start looking at how weather affects things and all.
Yeah.
But then we'll have things to actually talk about
right.
as far as what's being affected. Is there anything else that any of you guys would like to add?
No, I can't think of it.
All right, fantastic. Okay, well, with that is going to conclude our initial talks on environment. And in the next one, we're going to start discussing travel. And I believe Nelson's the man with all sorts of interesting stuff he wants to say there. And we'll see how it goes. So thank you guys very much. We'll see you in the next video.